everybody, and welcome back to another video. The Hive Queen is a book whose quality is debated upon by fans. Some readers loved it, whereas others thought it to be filler or a waste of potential. Personally, while I'm not a huge fan of Arc 3, I did enjoy Cricket and Snowfall the most out of our new protagonists. Despite this, however, I think there was a change to Cricket that could have been a game changer for how the Pantolan story was told. It was actually something Tui originally had as an idea, but scrapped pretty early on. But what was this detail that Tui altered about Cricket, and how do I think it could have caused a lot of improvement if it was included? I'll get into all of that and more in today's video. Spoilers for the Hive Queen ahead, so you have been warned. But before we begin, a huge shout out to my patrons. Dev1195, Slightest Wild, Fizz, Thistle, Noobto, Pyronuke, and Avril. Thank you all so much for supporting me. Links to social medias are in the description down below. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the video. The early books in Arc 3 were all about the hives. More specifically, Wasp's regime and dictatorship control. Her influence even spread to outside of the mind control, as many Hivewings grew up believing that what she was doing was right. Everything, down to the Silkwings being servants and the Leafwings losing their trees. But it even went so much deeper. Her control influenced every one of their decisions in life, the few they did have for themselves, anyway. The only known rebellion during this time was the Chrysalis, a secretive group of Silkwings who wanted to combat their oppression. However, most meetings were small and disorganized. The group wasn't able to accomplish nearly as much as they wanted, due to the fear of always being seen by Wasp's watching and vengeful eyes. It was so great that many dragons wanted change, and had the courage to meet up like that in the midst of enslavement and threats. Despite this courage, however, there really wasn't much that could be done due to their numbers. They didn't have connections or evidence to make the big changes they wanted to. Anything helps, but it just wasn't amounting to much in the end. And this is where Cricket should have come in. Several years ago, Tui revealed a piece of information about this knowledgeable Hivewing that had me shocked and so wishing she would have used it. Back when she began writing Arc 3, Tui had planned for Cricket to be a journalist or reporter. It might not seem like this would make the arc that much different when you first think about it. However, this goes way deeper than you may have realized. There are tons of real-life accounts and inspiring fictional stories about the effects of journalism. Revealing the facts and telling the stories that don't get told can literally save lives. This uncovering and boldness in doing so have changed the courses of many wars in history. The journalists of our world have such an important role, and Cricket could have quite literally changed the entire course of Arc 3 if Tui kept this detail. Let me explain. A major part of Cricket's character is how inquisitive she is. She knows what's happening around her isn't right, and she questions it, its morality, efficiency, and its consequences. A key aspect of journalism is not letting injustice stand, and being able to recognize when it's there. Unlike most Hivewings at the time, Cricket saw the truth, and she was brave enough to fight back. Think of how she went with Blue and the others to stop Wasp. Even the Hivewings with similar mindsets and observations hadn't dared to go as far as she did, not to our knowledge at least. The Hivewings are an advanced society, so they probably had a well-run news system. In newspapers, businesses, and investigative journalism. I can totally see that as part of their world. If Cricket were a journalist, she could have used her strengths of questioning the world to get the truth out there. She had the voice and the power to change minds and hearts, not only with her information, but the way she presented it. Cricket had a whole different life experience as she started to work with Silkwings. Imagine her conducting interviews with them to let the Hivewings know just how much they are real dragons and not so different from them at all. That is monumental in sparking change. You have to appeal to the heart. Not only would this have made the change at the end of the arc, Silkwings being free and Wasp being defeated, so much more powerful, but it would have been a bit more realistic too. Cricket should have been part of that rebellion, and I'm not just talking about the quiet part. She should have had to battle her shyness and use up all her courage to speak out to the world. Imagine Cricket being a hiving journalist or reporter prior to meeting Blue as well. This would give her more reason to feel uncomfortable by the things she was seeing around her, as she had clear access to it. She would have hated having to write pieces on anti-silkwing and leafwing topics. Encouraging the punishments to unruly silkwings would have been painful to have to include in her articles. Surely WASP would have had groups of cub reporters visit the silkwing imprisonment halls and write about how safe and necessary they were. So, to see Cricket rip the chain she was held to and write about what really happens in places like flame silk factories would have been amazing. Imagine how scary it would be for her to have to disobey, to seek an article passed for all the hives to see, to print something fully catching WASP in all her lies and cruelty. That is what we could have gotten from Arc 3, not some magical, thousands of years old threat for the group to face. Because there are a lot of internal and ancient enemies, but they are not a deceased human with an evil plant. It's real stuff, like finding the courage to fight back against lies. Using the press to save their society, to save the real lives of dragons. Imagine this being out, and then Cricket being forced to flee. When you return to the hives at the end of the arc, there's a noticeable change in the hivewings when they're no longer being controlled by WASP. The same would go for the silkwings. They should have had to fight the mind control themselves at some point. Sure, the destroying of the other mind would still happen, but before it did, I wanted to see the characters of Pantala fight. Fight against the way they were treated. Fight against the way they were raised. They had seen all those newspapers Cricket wrote, and how she disappeared after using her supposedly free speech. There was evidence enough, and it was time to stop giving in. Imagine all of Pantala remembering and confronting that pain. They would weaken the other mind's control just enough for Luna to slice into its roots and vines, and end the conflict once and for all. When the villain is a real person, that can be scary, but it's also true sometimes. Do you see how Cricket being a journalist could have changed the third arc? I want empowerment. I want the victory to be earned and not just end a fight, but to change a society. The Leaf Silk Kingdom coming about does make a bit of sense, but I think it should have been more emphasized as to how the change occurred so fast. Imagine waking up and seeing your claws in another dragon. Nobody wanted that kind of world again, and Cricket could have been the one to save it. A person just like many of us. What do you guys think? Personally, I'm a huge fan of this idea I came up with. I think it would have changed the fundamental aspects and lessons of Arc 3, a storyline that came across as messy and confusing to many. That's pretty much it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!